Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. 2 nights from now, the January 6th committee will hold its first public hearings live in prime time to lay out the evidence to the entire nation of the plot to overthrow an American presidential election by conspiracy and violence. And most of the nation will be able to watch those hearings. We, of course, will be covering the hearings right here, as will all major broadcast networks, but not the viewers of Fox News. That channel made the announcement it will not be airing this Thursday's hearing live, but it will be counter-programming with its usual pro-Trump pundits and providing its own laundered version of coverage after the fact. It is both a predictable and cowardly decision. One of the many reasons Fox may not want to cover the hearings is because the plain facts of the day are just so morally indefensible, even, I suspect, to most Fox viewers. Donald Trump encouraged his supporters to violently disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. And showing that could make Fox viewers feel bad. And Fox is not in the business of making its viewers feel bad. Nor is it in the business of giving its viewers the unvarnished truth, especially when it comes to Donald Trump. The last time the network did that, it faced the closest thing to an existential threat it has seen in its history. You might remember on election night, it was Fox News, first among the networks, that correctly called Arizona for Joe Biden. That was big because it put him over once other states started to come back, and the Trump campaign was furious. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, called Fox's owner, Rupert Murdoch, to demand the network retract the call. It did not. And Trump supporters, who did not want to hear that their guy lost, started tuning out. They turned to competitors to the right, like One American News and Newsmax. Organizations that were more than willing to push Trump's big lie of a stolen election, no matter how preposterous the theories to support it. And for the first time in its life, basically, Fox faced a real challenge from its right. Because you know what? Its viewers didn't want to hear that Joe Biden won the election. They wanted to hear from conspiracy theorists spouting outlandish excuses for how the election was stolen. Trump himself wanted to hear the same thing, of course, began touting Fox's competitors. And in December 2020, a few weeks after the major outlets called the election for Biden, Fox News even lost in the ratings to Newsmax, for the first time ever. Well, let me tell you something. I know a thing or two about this business. That seemed to really spook Fox, and I mean really spook them. So that may be one reason why the network does not want to acknowledge January 6th. Didn't happen. Then, of course, there's also the fact that many of the network stars are central to the story. They are principals in it. Fox anchor Sean Hannity was texting with Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in the days leading up to the insurrection. On December 31st, a week before the insurrection, Hannity texted Meadows, quote, "I do not see January 6th happening the way he's being told. After the 6th, he should announce he will lead the nationwide effort to reform voting integrity. Go to Florida and watch Joe mess up daily. Stay engaged. When he speaks, people listen." Isn't that funny? Sean Hannity giving like a pat, like, "Attaboy, time to exit the stage." Now, we should know Hannity defended those texts by arguing he is not a journalist, which manifestly he's not, but just a talk show host. But this is the good news for Fox viewers. This Thursday, they can change the channel over to the hearing and still see all their favorite primetime anchors because they are going to be part of the show.
Multiple Fox News hosts knew the president needed to act immediately. They texted Mr. Meadows, and he has turned over those texts. Quote, "Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy," Laura Ingraham wrote. "Please get him on TV. Destroying everything you have accomplished," Brian Kilmeade texted. Quote, "Can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol," Sean Hannity urged.
So you can see why the January 6th story might be a little embarrassing for Fox. Their hosts are not just observers of the story, they were participants. They were begging and pleading for Trump to stop the insurrection. They were mortified, just like everyone else who wasn't storming the Capitol or Donald Trump. But there's also a larger reason here, of course, at play, why they might not want to cover the hearings. In modern American politics, in the last, 70 years, There are essentially two big comparisons for monumental, opinion-shifting televised hearings. Up first, there were the McCarthy Army hearings. Now, back in 1954, you probably know the contours of this story, but the specifics are interesting. Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin was basically mad with power, right? He was this right-wing demagogue. His high-profile investigations into alleged communist subversion of the U.S. government had made him this overnight star. And his position chairing the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations made him arguably the most influential politician in the country. But McCarthy's ego and demagoguery and paranoia got the best of him. And he went after the U.S. Army, of all places, for alleged communist sympathies. This is in 1954, okay? In return, the Army began investigating allegations that McCarthy's right-hand man, committee lawyer, attorney Roy Cohn, had abused his position to request special favors for a buddy who had been drafted into the Army. So the Army held hearings. So this clip comes from June 9th, 1954. The Army Counsel, a man by the name of Joseph Welch, had just been grilling Roy Cohn about these accusations when McCarthy just decides to go after one of Welch's employees, a kind of tit for tat, but that employee was not involved in the hearings. Had nothing to do with it whatsoever. This is just McCarthy trying to bully Welch, right? Just picking one of his employees and going after him in public, accusing the private citizen of being a communist. And Welch finally snapped at McCarthy.
May I say that Mr. Welch talks about this being cruel and reckless. He was just baiting. He has been baiting Mr. Cohn here for hours, requesting that Mr. Cohn, before sundown, get out of any department of the government anyone who is serving the communist cause. Now, I just give this man's record, and I want to say, Mr. Welch, that it has been labeled long before he became a member, as early as 1944.
Senator, may we not drop this? We know he belongs to Lawyers Guild. And Mr. Cohn nods his head at me. I did you, I think, no personal injury, Mr. Cohn.
No, sir.
I meant to do you no personal injury. And if I did, I beg your pardon. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
That's it. That's the moment, right? You maybe have heard those words. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you no decency left? That moment might as well have ended McCarthy's career. By one account, 16 million Americans are watching that night. That's more than a quarter of the total number of voters who'd voted in the last election. Some 80 million watched the hearings in total, which was half the number of all Americans of all ages. Later that year, McCarthy was censured by his colleagues for his conduct during these hearings, and his reign was effectively over. That's the power that live televised hearings can have. And it's worth noting, of course, that Roy Cohn, the man who witnessed his own downfall or his boss's downfall firsthand during those hearings, would later serve as close confidant and mentor to none other than Donald Trump. Now, 2 decades after the McCarthy hearings, the nation again turns its eyes to live gavel-to-gavel coverage, this time for the Nixon Watergate hearings. The three commercial networks aired them as they happened, first all together, then in a rotation. PBS re-aired them unedited at night. Listen to how PBS justified that decision at the time.
We are running it all each day because we think these hearings are important, and because we think it is important that you get a chance to see the whole thing and make your own judgments. Some nights we may be in competition with a late movie. We are doing this as an experiment, temporarily abandoning our ability to edit to give you the whole story, however many hours it may take.
It's a bold decision, but one that allowed the country, by some estimate 80% of Americans, to watch the Watergate hearings unfold in real time. You hear discussions about how President Richard Nixon's inner circle conspired to break into the Democratic headquarters and then covered it up. Like this testimony from Jeb Magruder, who served on the infamous Committee to Re-elect the President.
When did you first begin planning the cover-up?
Oh, I think there was no question that the cover-up began that Saturday when we realized there was a break-in. I don't think there was ever any discussion that there wouldn't be a cover-up. At least I did not participate in any discussion that indicated anything else except that at one point where we possibly thought that I might volunteer to become the key figure in the case.
An historic decision to go forward with this plan was followed with another historic decision to cover it up without any great debate or discussion of the matter.
That's correct, sir.
Richard Nixon's approval rating dropped by 17 points in the months after those hearings, according to Pew. It continued to drop over the next year until Nixon ultimately resigned under threat of impeachment. Again, the live televised hearings were a major contributor to Nixon's downfall. That's something that was no doubt observed by Nixon's media consultant, a man by the name of Roger Ailes. During his tenure in the White House, Ailes wanted to launch a news network that would be explicitly pro-Republican in its message to help Nixon defend Nixon in the media. And while he didn't get his wish at the time, Ailes eventually went on to create Fox News a few decades later. And now Donald Trump has what Richard Nixon and Joe McCarthy did not. A major news network that will run interference for the ex-president real time no matter what he does. And Fox has apparently decided the best way to shield Trump from the embarrassing truth the January 6th committee will reveal in its hearings is simply not cover them at all.